is Josh Chambers Letson, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Performance Studies at Northwestern University in the School of Communication. And my book, Erased So Different, won the Outstanding Book Award from ATHA. It started as a dissertation, as most first books do. And it's weird actually being in 2014 because the book was so much a product of living in the US during the Bush administration. And in particular watching the sort of increased suspension of all sorts of basic protections, mostly for racialized subjects, as a result of the consolidation of the national security state. So I got deeply interested in what a lot of people were interested in, which was the discourse of the state of exception. Like many of the other people interested in that discourse, I was tracing it through thinkers like Giorgio Agamben, and in particular for me, Carl Schmitt. And what I started to think about was the way in which certain forms of exception as a kind of category of civic existence are produced for racialized subjects and have been produced for racialized subjects throughout the history of the US, right? So the law, though it seems to be universal, in fact, only applies to certain subjects some of the time. And that part of the question for me then was, well, how does that come to be? So the book itself was a critique of legal ideology, but it was one that was sort of a Trojan horse Marxist critique, even though Marx doesn't make that much of a presence in the text. So sort of where I've been going next is actually just going straight to Marx. So I'm working on a project about Marxist theory and minoritarian performance. And while that takes up questions of law, mostly those questions, instead of being how the law works, which is one of the things that Erased So Different approached, the new work that I'm looking at is more nearly how can we obliterate and destroy the law, smash the state, do whatever we need to do to emancipate ourselves from the conditions of existence that we currently exist in, which I would argue are not enough based on the history presented in Erased So Different and the various other sort of material forms of evidence of life at the ground level today, one being all of the refugee centers that we're seeing right now at the border, and on and on and on. Because the book has a somewhat historical bent, right? It looks back to the 19th century. It starts in Guantanamo, then jumps back to the 19th century to the period of Chinese exclusion, makes its way through Japanese internment, through the sort of post-Vietnam period, and back to the present. I think one of the things that I would hope that the book could do is just help us to historicize the present, right, in very particular ways. So when we're looking at strategies for combating either sort of like support for the national security state or the state itself, I think it's useful to look at the past and see what people have done, how people have survived the imposition of violence put upon them by the state, and how people have also played with and negotiated in order to thrive and actually create alternative ways of being. And that's actually where aesthetics comes in, and performance in particular, right? Because performance is a place where you can play with the limited resources that you have around you. So, you know, where the state can kind of determine your action within a limited range, right? With performance, you can kind of do whatever the fuck you want, right? And, you know, I use that colloquial language purposely because you are actually fucking with stuff, right? You're trying to make something happen that seems impossible, right? So my hope would be that the book would help illuminate how people, for example, activists in the concentration camps during World War II, were able to use performance to play with the state at the precise moment that the state was saying, you know, you deserve to be here. And then they used performance as a way of getting the state to kind of indict itself in doing that. So I guess two parts. I hope it helps to historicize, and I hope it helps to allow people to see the kinds of strategies that people of color in particular have come up with to survive hostile and sometimes unbearable conditions.